1975. A British family piles into their new Ford Cortina. Dad's in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. Mom's in the front, no seatbelt. The three kids are standing in the back seat, leaning over the front headrests, chattering excitedly. They're heading to the seaside for the weekend. The car accelerates onto the motorway. 70 miles per hour. No seatbelts, no child seats, no airbags, no crumple zones. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't reckless. This was normal. And British car companies advertised it that way. For decades, British car ads celebrated speed, power, and freedom, and barely mentioned safety. Seatbelts were optional extras. Airbags didn't exist. Child restraints were considered overly cautious. And the ads? They showed families just like this one, driving without protection, because safety wasn't sexy. It didn't sell cars. This is the story of 15 British car ads from the 1970s that promoted vehicles with zero safety features, and what it cost. Let's start with the seatbelt situation. In 1975, wearing a seatbelt in Britain was optional. Car manufacturers weren't required to install them in the back seats. And even in the front, many drivers didn't bother. Why? Because the ads didn't emphasize safety. They emphasized freedom. One Ford Cortina ad from 1974 showed a family driving through the countryside, windows down, kids waving out the back. The tagline, "The Cortina, built for the open road. No seatbelts visible. No mention of restraints. Just freedom." Another ad for the Austin Allegro featured a mother driving with three children bouncing around the back seat. The voiceover said, "Room for the whole family, and then some." The message was clear. Space mattered. Comfort mattered. Safety? Not so much. It wasn't until 1983 that front seatbelts became mandatory in Britain. Rear seatbelts? 1989. For over a decade, British families drove without protection because car companies didn't think safety sold. Then there were the speed-obsessed ads. In the 70s and 80s, British car manufacturers marketed their vehicles based on how fast they could go, not how safe they were. One ad for the Vauxhall Viva showed a man accelerating hard on a winding country road. The speedometer climbed. The voiceover said, "Feel the power. Feel alive." Another ad for the Triumph Dolomite featured a driver racing through narrow British streets, tires screeching. The tagline, "Built for drivers who don't hold back." These ads didn't show crashes. They didn't show consequences. They showed exhilaration. And British buyers responded. Speed was masculinity. Speed was success. In 1976, road deaths in Britain peaked at over 7,000 per year. Many of those deaths were in high-speed collisions. But the car companies kept advertising speed as freedom. Because fear doesn't sell. Thrill does. Let's talk about the child safety disaster. In the 1970s, child car seats were rare in Britain. Most families just let kids sit or stand in the back. And the car ads reflected that. One ad for the British Leyland Mini showed two young children standing between the front seats, heads poking into the front cabin. The parents smiled. The voiceover said, "The Mini, big enough for the whole family." Another ad for the Hillman Avenger featured kids jumping around in the back seat while the car was moving. No restraints, no booster seats, nothing. The implication was that kids should be free to move around, that restraining them was unnecessary, even cruel. But the physics were brutal. In a crash at just 30 miles per hour, an unrestrained child becomes a projectile. They're thrown forward with the force of a falling elephant. Thousands of British children died or were permanently injured in car accidents during the 70s. And the car companies? They kept showing happy, unrestrained kids in their ads. Now the smoking while driving normalization. Almost every British car ad from the 70s showed someone smoking. Behind the wheel, windows up, kids in the back. One ad for the Rover SD1 featured a well-dressed man driving through London, cigarette in hand, ashtray overflowing. The tagline, "Rover, for the man who's made it." Another ad showed a woman smoking while driving her children to school. The voiceover said, "Style, comfort, confidence." Smoking while driving wasn't just accepted, it was aspirational. But here's the problem. Smoking impairs reaction time. It distracts drivers. And secondhand smoke in enclosed cars damages children's lungs. One 1980 study found that children whose parents smoked in the car had a 40% higher rate of respiratory illness. But the ads made it look sophisticated, classy, normal. It wasn't banned in cars with children until 2015, 40 years too late. Let's talk about the structural safety lies. In the 70s, British cars were death traps. They had no crumple zones, areas designed to absorb impact. They had no side impact protection. Dashboards were hard metal and sharp edges. Steering columns didn't collapse. They impaled drivers in frontal crashes. But the ads never mentioned this. One ad for the Austin Maxi boasted about its solid steel body. Another ad for the Morris Marina bragged about British engineering toughness. They made it sound like strength. But rigid cars don't protect passengers. They transfer all crash energy directly into the cabin. Crumple zones save lives by absorbing impact. British cars didn't have them. And the result? In 1975, you were 3 times more likely to die in a car crash in Britain than you are today. The cars were coffins on wheels, but the ads made them look indestructible. Then there was the visibility problem. Many British cars in the 70s had terrible visibility. Thick pillars, small windows, no reversing cameras, because they didn't exist, and the ads celebrated it. One ad for the Ford Capri showed the car's sleek, low profile. The tagline, fast, aggressive, bold. But that low profile meant drivers couldn't see pedestrians, cyclists, or children. Another ad for the Triumph TR7 featured dramatic angles and narrow windows. It looked cool, but it was dangerous. Blind spots killed. In 1978, a 7-year-old girl in Manchester was reversed over by her own father. He didn't see her. The car was a Morris Ital. The ad for that car had emphasized its sporty design, not its safety. She survived, barely. Cases like that happen constantly. But car companies prioritized aesthetics over visibility. Because good-looking cars sold, safe cars didn't. Now the alcohol and driving implications. This is subtle, but important. Many British car ads in the 70s featured pubs, parties, and social drinking. One ad for the Volkswagen Golf showed a group of friends leaving a country pub, piling into a car, laughing. The tagline, the Golf, built for the good times. The implication, drink at the pub, drive home. It's fine. Another ad for the Peugeot 504 showed a man at a dinner party, wine glass in hand, then driving home through the night. The voiceover said, the drive home is half the pleasure. These ads didn't explicitly encourage drink driving, but they normalized it. In 1980, over 20% of British drivers admitted to driving after a few drinks. The legal limit was higher than it is today. Enforcement was lax. And the car ads subtly reinforced the idea that driving after drinking was part of social life. It wasn't until the 1990s that Britain cracked down. By then, thousands had died. Let's talk about the safety-optional marketing. In the 70s, many safety features were sold as expensive extras. Seatbelts, headrests, anti-lock brakes. Airbags didn't exist yet. But the other features did, and car companies charged extra for them. One ad for the British Leyland Princess listed Deluxe Safety Pack as an optional upgrade. It included rear seatbelts and padded headrests. The base model? None of that. Another ad for the Vauxhall Cavalier offered safety extras, like a collapsible steering column, for an additional fee. The message was, safety is luxury. If you're on a budget, you don't need it. And working-class British families who couldn't afford the extras drove without them. This wasn't regulation failure, it was profit prioritization. Car companies knew safety features saved lives. They just didn't make them standard because doing so would cut into margins. And the ads framed safety as optional, as something cautious people wanted, not something everyone needed. Here's the part about children in the front seat. In the 70s, it was common and legal for children to sit in the front passenger seat. No booster, no special restraint. Just a regular seatbelt, if that. And the ads showed it constantly. One ad for the Chrysler Alpine featured a young boy sitting in the front seat, grinning at his father. The tagline, room for everyone. Another ad for the Datsun Cherry showed a little girl riding up front, standing on the seat, hands on the dashboard. The parent smiled. But front airbags, when they were eventually introduced, were designed for adults. A child in the front seat, especially unrestrained, faced catastrophic injury or death if the airbag deployed. Even with a seatbelt, children's smaller bodies couldn't handle front seat crashes. But for decades, British car ads normalized it. Made it look safe, made it look normal. It wasn't. It was lethal. Let's talk about the roadworthiness lies. British car ads in the 70s often showed vehicles driving on dirt roads, through water, over rough terrain. The implication, these cars are tough. They can handle anything. One ad for the Land Rover showed the vehicle plowing through a muddy field. Another ad for the Range Rover featured the car fording a river. These ads made the vehicles look indestructible. But many British cars from that era rusted within years. Brakes failed. Suspensions collapsed. Rust holes appeared in floors. One infamous model, the Allegro, was nicknamed the car that rusted while you watched. But the ads never showed that. They showed adventure, durability, reliability. British buyers believed it. They bought cars that fell apart. And when those cars failed on the road, brakes giving out, steering locking up, people died. But the ads kept showing tough, reliable vehicles. Because the truth didn't sell. Now the gender stereotypes that endangered women. Many British car ads in the 70s targeted men exclusively. They framed cars as tools of masculinity, power, control, and they framed women as passengers or incompetent drivers. One ad for the Ford Escort showed a man driving confidently while his wife nervously clutched the door handle. The tagline, "He knows how to handle it." Another ad for the Jaguar XJ6 featured a woman struggling to park. A man takes over. The voiceover says, "Some things are better left to the experts." These ads didn't just mock women, they discouraged them from learning to drive safely. They reinforced the idea that women were bad drivers, that cars were men's domain. And this had real consequences. British women were less likely to receive proper driving education. They were more likely to be passengers in cars driven by men. Men who, statistically, took more risks, drove faster, and caused more fatal crashes. The ads didn't just reflect gender norms, they enforced them, and women paid the price. Then there's the environmental recklessness. British car ads in the 70s celebrated pollution. One ad for the Rover 5.8 showed black exhaust smoke billowing from the tailpipe. The voiceover said, "Power you can see." Another ad for the Triumph Stag featured the car accelerating, thick smoke trailing behind. The tagline, "Feel the roar." These ads made pollution look powerful, masculine, desirable. There was no mention of emissions, no mention of air quality, no mention of the environment. Because in the 70s, environmentalism was fringe. And car companies knew that big engines, high emissions, and visible smoke signaled power. So they advertised it. British cities choked on smog. Children developed asthma. But the ads kept celebrating exhaust fumes. Because clean air doesn't sell cars, power does. Here's the most enraging part. The car companies knew. By the mid-70s, internal research from British Leyland, Ford, and Vauxhall showed that safety features, seatbelts, crumple zones, airbags, saved lives. They had the data. They had the engineering. But they didn't make safety standard. Why? Cost. Implementing safety features across all models would cut profits. And British car companies in the 70s were struggling financially. So they made safety optional. They kept it out of ads. They framed it as unnecessary. And British drivers, trusting, loyal British drivers, bought cars that killed them. Between 1970 and 1980, over 70,000 people died on British roads. Many of those deaths were preventable. Better restraints, better engineering, better regulations. But the car companies prioritized profit, and the ads sold freedom, power, and style. Not safety. Never safety. Today, British roads are among the safest in the world. Seatbelts are mandatory. Airbags are standard. Cars have crumple zones, stability control, automatic braking. Child seats are legally required. Smoking in cars with children is banned. Drink driving is heavily policed. But it took decades and tens of thousands of deaths to get here, and the car companies didn't lead that change. They resisted it. They lobbied against seatbelt laws. They fought emissions standards. They argued that safety features would make cars too expensive. It wasn't until public pressure, government regulation, and grassroots campaigns forced their hand that British cars became safe. These ads aren't just nostalgia. They're evidence. Evidence of an industry that chose profit over people, that marketed death as freedom, and got away with it for far too long.